Their story has been a reality show, a family drama, and a financial nightmare. Now, it's about to become an international incident. For years, we have watched the saga of Jenny Slatten and Sumit Singh unfold, a journey of love against all odds, we were told. A tale of cultural clashes, family disapproval, and the enduring power of a bond that transcended age and distance. But what if that wasn't the story at all? What if hidden in plain sight, broadcast to millions, was a far more sinister narrative? A story not of romance, but of calculated exploitation, a slow, methodical process of isolation, financial ruin, and psychological control. We are here today because, according to exclusive insider reports, the story has taken a definitive and shocking turn. The curtain of reality television is being torn away, and what lies behind it has allegedly triggered an investigation at the highest levels, placing Sumit Singh directly in the crosshairs of the United States government. Before we dive into the explosive details of this alleged federal intervention, take a moment to click that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You are watching the channel that goes deeper than the headlines, that connects the dots the mainstream recaps miss. If you believe in holding people accountable, and if you've ever felt that something about Jenny and Sumit's story was deeply wrong, then like this video right now. You are not just a viewer. You are part of a community that demands truth, and your engagement helps us bring these critical stories to light. Now let's get into it. The catalyst for this seismic shift was not a television producer or a network executive. It was, according to our sources, a viewer. But not just any viewer. This individual, a retired paralegal from Ohio, had been watching the story unfold from the very beginning, not as entertainment, but as a potential crime in progress. Over the course of several years, this person allegedly compiled what is being described as the Slatten dossier. This wasn't a collection of fan theories or Reddit posts. This was a meticulously organized, cross-referenced, 280-page document, complete with time-stamped evidence from every episode, every spin-off, every social media post. It was a forensic accounting of Jenny's life savings, a geographical analysis of her increasing isolation, and a legal breakdown of the visa and marital deceptions that have defined her life in India. This dossier, our sources claim, was formally submitted to the American Citizen Services, or ACS, unit at the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi. This wasn't a fan email. It was a formal complaint filed under protocols designed to protect American citizens abroad, specifically invoking clauses related to the exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The dossier alleged a clear and persistent pattern of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and coercive control, arguing that Jenny Slatten, a senior citizen in a foreign country with no independent support system, was a textbook case of a vulnerable citizen being systematically exploited under the guise of marriage. To understand the gravity of this, we need to understand what happens when such a complaint lands on the desk of a consular officer. It's not like a letter to a congressman, it's like a 911 call for a diplomat. We spoke with a source, an ex-diplomat with over 2 decades of experience in the Foreign Service, who agreed to speak on the condition of anonymity. Let's call him Richard. Richard explained that the ACS unit is the frontline defense for Americans overseas. When a credible allegation involving a vulnerable citizen, especially a senior, is received, it triggers a non-negotiable protocol, he told us. The first step is a welfare and whereabouts check. This isn't just a casual, "How are you doing?" It's an official inquiry to determine the citizen's location, their immediate physical safety, and their general state of well-being. The Slatten dossier, however, was allegedly so detailed that it bypassed the standard initial assessment. The sheer volume of evidence, the financial records pieced together from Jenny's own on-air statements, the timeline of Sumit's long-term unemployment, the history of his catfishing and secret marriage, the pattern of moving Jenny to more and more remote locations, it painted a picture so disturbing that the embassy reportedly fast-tracked the case. It was no longer a simple welfare check. It was now a full-blown investigation into potential exploitation. Let's break down the key pillars of the case laid out in that dossier. The evidence that allegedly forced the U.S. government to act. First and most damning was the financial exploitation. The dossier presented a brutal, year-by-year accounting of Jenny Slatten's financial decline. It began with her life savings. We all heard her say it on camera. She retired, cashed in her 401k, sold her home and all her possessions in America to move to India with the promise of marriage. The dossier allegedly put a number on this initial investment, estimated from her statements to be in the low 6 figures. This was her entire nest egg. her security for her golden years. The document then tracked the outflow of that money. For years, Sumit remained largely unemployed or underemployed. His call center job at the beginning was the source of the initial catfishing lie. After that, his career aspirations have been a series of false starts and unfulfilled promises. The food business, the cooking classes, all presented on the show as charming ventures, were reframed in the dossier as financial black holes, funded entirely by Jenny's dwindling Social Security and savings. The dossier allegedly included a market analysis of the cost of living in their various Indian residences versus Jenny's fixed income. The math was stark and unforgiving. It showed that her American retirement funds were not just supplementing their lifestyle. They were their lifestyle. Sumit, a healthy man in his 30s, was for all intents and purposes living off the retirement fund of an American senior citizen. Richard, our diplomatic source, put this in context. Consular officers are trained to spot financial red flags, he said. When you see a U.S. citizen, particularly a senior, liquidating all their U.S. assets to support a much younger foreign national who remains unemployed, that's not just a romance. That is a classic textbook pattern of financial exploitation. The U.S. government has a term for this: induced dependency. The perpetrator ensures the victim is financially entangled to the point where leaving is not just emotionally difficult, but economically impossible. The second pillar of the dossier was isolation as a tool of control. The complaint didn't just see their frequent moves as a search for a cheaper or more accepting home. It mapped them, from the bustling metropolis of Delhi to the relative quiet of Noida, and then to areas even further from the expat-heavy centers. Each move, the dossier argued, served a dual purpose. It placated Sumit's family by creating distance, but more strategically, it systematically stripped Jenny of the ability to form an independent social circle. In a major city like Delhi, she might have stumbled upon an American expat group, a women's club, or other English-speaking seniors. She could have found a community, people who might have offered an outside perspective, people who might have asked the hard questions. By moving her to more remote residential areas where she was the only American, the only white face, the only English native speaker for miles, Sumit allegedly ensured he was her entire world, her translator, her guide, her sole companion, her connection to everything. This, the dossier argued, is a classic tactic of coercive control. You don't need physical walls to build a prison when you can create one with geography and language. Her world became an echo chamber, with Sumit's voice and his family's drama as the only sounds. The ex-diplomat Richard confirmed this. We see this in marriage fraud and exploitation cases all the time. The perpetrator isolates the victim from their natural support systems. They cut them off from friends, family back home, and any potential local allies. It makes the victim entirely reliant on the abuser, magnifying their control. An embassy official seeing this pattern would be extremely concerned. The third and perhaps most legally potent pillar was the wing and sordid history of visa and marital manipulation. This wasn't just about a man lying to his girlfriend. The dossier reframed the entire catfishing saga as the foundational act of a long con. Sumit, posing as Michael Jones, didn't just lie about his name and appearance. He lied about his fundamental eligibility to marry. He was already married. This lie, the dossier argued, was not a simple mistake of youth. It was a calculated deception to secure Jenny's emotional and, crucially, financial investment while he was legally and culturally entangled elsewhere. The complaint then chronicled the years of excuses and delays that followed. The lengthy, agonizing divorce process, the constant shifting of goalposts, the endless promises of marriage that were always just around the corner, but never quite arrived. All the while, Jenny's tourist visa was a ticking clock. The threat of her being forced to leave India was a weapon Sumit allegedly wielded with expert precision. Every few months, she was faced with the prospect of being deported, of losing everything. This constant state of instability, the dossier claimed, kept her in a perpetual state of anxiety and off-balance, making her more compliant and less likely to challenge Sumit's authority. He held the key to her ability to even remain in the country, a powerful tool of control. When they finally did marry, it was in secret, without his parents' knowledge. On the show, this was framed as a romantic, if fraught, decision. The dossier reframed it as Sumit's final move to legally bind Jenny to him, securing her financial resources, like her pension and Social Security, which he could potentially have claims to as a spouse, while still playing the victim to his own family. He got the legal security of marriage without the social or familial responsibility. This is where it gets into really dangerous territory for the foreign national, Richard explained. When you're dealing with U.S. immigration and consular law, any hint of fraud or misrepresentation is taken with the utmost seriousness. The history of deception regarding his first marriage, coupled with the use of visa status as a point of leverage against an American citizen, that's a file that gets a red flag. It suggests that the marriage itself may have been entered into under false pretenses or for the primary purpose of financial gain and immigration benefits. If the embassy believes this is the case, the foreign spouse, in this case Sumit, is in a world of trouble. With this mountain of evidence laid out, the dossier concluded with a chilling summary. Jenny Slatten was not in a troubled but loving marriage. She was a financially depleted, geographically isolated, and psychologically controlled American senior, trapped in a foreign country by a man who had been deceiving her for over a decade. The document formally requested an in-person welfare check to interview Ms. Slatten alone, away from the influence of her husband, to ascertain the truth of her situation. According to our sources, the complaint was taken so seriously that the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi initiated its protocol within 72 hours. The first step was allegedly a phone call. A consular officer, a fluent English and Hindi speaker, placed a call to the number on file for Jenny. As anticipated by the complaint, Sumit answered the phone. The officer identified themselves and asked to speak directly with Ms. Slatten regarding a private consular matter. Here, Sumit's alleged pattern of control became immediately apparent. Sources describe him as being evasive, asking who was calling and why. When the officer reiterated the need to speak with Jenny alone, he allegedly claimed she was resting, or that she was busy, or that he could pass along a message. He tried to act as the gatekeeper, the intermediary for all her communications, a key behavior highlighted in the dossier. The consular officer, trained for these situations, was polite but firm. They stated they would call back at a specific time. This phone call was a critical diagnostic tool. Sumit's refusal to immediately and freely pass the phone to his American wife was in itself a massive red flag. It corroborated the dossier's primary assertion, that Jenny was not a free agent in her own home. The decision was then made to escalate from remote contact to an in-person visit. This was no longer a preliminary inquiry. This was an intervention. Richard, our diplomatic source, lays out the stakes of such a visit. An unannounced consular visit is a very serious step. It means the embassy has reason to believe that the U.S. citizen is in potential danger or is being prevented from communicating freely. Two consular officials are typically dispatched. They are not law enforcement, but they are representatives of the U.S. government on foreign soil. Their mission is singular: to gain access to the American citizen and to assess their safety and free will alone. The preparation for this visit would have been meticulous. The officials would have reviewed the entire dossier. They would have had satellite images of the residence. They would have had a plan for various contingencies. What if they are refused entry? What if Sumit becomes hostile? What if Jenny herself denies any problem? A common occurrence in the cases of coercive control, often referred to as a trauma bond. The day of the visit, according to our insider reports, was a normal, quiet weekday. Jenny and Sumit were likely at home, perhaps filming a segment for their social media or simply going about their day, completely unaware that their carefully constructed reality was about to be shattered. A nondescript vehicle with diplomatic plates pulled up to their building. Two individuals, a man and a woman, dressed in professional business attire, approached their door. They were not camera operators or producers. They were consular officers from the Embassy of the United States of America. They knocked. Imagine the scene. Sumit opens the door, perhaps expecting a delivery or a neighbor. He sees two serious-looking people he doesn't recognize. Before he can speak, one of them holds up their official identification. "Good afternoon. We are from the American Embassy in New Delhi. We are here on official consular business to speak with U.S. citizen Jennifer Slatten." The use of that specific language is key. They didn't say your wife. They didn't say Jenny. They used her full official name and identified her by her citizenship. This was a deliberate act to establish the context. This is not a social call. This is a government matter between the United States and one of its citizens. The immediate shock on Sumit's face must have been palpable. For a decade, he has operated within the bubble of a reality TV show and a family drama he could largely control. He was the gatekeeper, the protagonist, the one who set the terms. He was accustomed to dealing with producers he could charm and a wife who was emotionally dependent on him. He was not prepared to deal with this. These were not people who cared about ratings or storylines. These were federal employees with a mandate, backed by the full weight and authority of the US government. The request that followed was the one he had allegedly tried to block on the phone, the one he feared the most. "We need to speak with Ms. Slatten alone, please." This is the moment the game changes. Sumit's entire world, built on controlling the narrative and isolating Jenny, is pierced by two people who have the authority to override him. He can't say no. Refusing to allow U.S. consular officials to speak to a U.S. citizen would be an act of obstruction with catastrophic consequences. It would instantly validate every claim of isolation and control in the dossier. He would be, in effect, confessing. So, he has to let them in. He has to watch as these two strangers, these representatives of the country Jenny left behind for him, enter his home. And he has to comply as they politely but immovably insist on a private conversation with his wife. He is asked to wait in another room. The door closes, and for the first time in possibly years, Jenny Slatten is alone with people whose only interest is her welfare, not his. Inside that room, the conversation would be gentle but probing. The consular officers are trained to deal with victims of abuse who may be frightened, confused, or even protective of their abuser. They wouldn't start with accusations. They would start with simple, open-ended questions. How are you feeling, Jenny? How are you finding life in India? Do you have access to your own money? Are you able to contact your family and friends back home whenever you want? Is your passport in your possession? This last question is critical. In many exploitation cases, the abuser will hold the victim's passport, making it physically impossible for them to leave. Whether Jenny's passport was in her own purse or locked away somewhere by Sumit would be a hugely significant piece of information for the officials. They would then move on to more specific issues, likely referencing the information in the complaint without revealing its source. We understand you used your retirement savings to move here. Are you financially secure? Do you feel you have control over your own financial decisions? Do you ever feel pressured to stay here? Do you know that the U.S. Embassy is here to help any American citizen who wants to return home? We can assist you with a flight, a temporary loan, a new passport, anything you need. You only need to say the word. For Jenny, this moment must be a dizzying mix of terror and perhaps a dawning sense of relief. For years, her reality has been defined by Sumit's needs, his family's demands, and the constant low-grade fear of her visa expiring. The idea of an escape route, a powerful entity stepping in and saying, "We've got you," might be something she hadn't even allowed herself to fantasize about. But the trauma bond is strong. She may deny everything. She may defend Sumit fiercely, repeating the justifications and explanations she has been telling herself for years. He loves me. His family is just difficult. The money situation is temporary. I'm happy here. The consular officers are prepared for this. They wouldn't argue. They would listen patiently. And then they would leave her with a card with a direct 24/7 phone number to the ACS unit. If anything changes, if you ever feel unsafe, if you just want to talk, you call this number. Day or night, someone will always answer. And then they leave. The immediate crisis of the visit is over, but the reckoning has just begun. The officials now have their own first-hand assessment of the situation. They observe Sumit's demeanor. They observe the home environment. They have Jenny's testimony, whether it was a cry for help or a staunch defense. They will now compile their own field report to add to the Slatten dossier. Meanwhile, Sumit is left in the aftermath. The calm professional demeanor of the officials is gone, and he is alone with the terrifying implications of what just happened. The U.S. government is watching him. They have his address. They have his name. They believe he might be harming one of their citizens. The carefully managed world he built has been invaded, and the power dynamic has been irrevocably altered. He is no longer just Jenny's husband or a TLC personality. He is a person of interest in a U.S. consular investigation. The immediate consequence is that Jenny now has a secret. She has a lifeline. She has a phone number in her pocket that represents a power outside of his control. This knowledge alone shifts the atmosphere in their home. Can he continue to control her finances, knowing the embassy might be scrutinizing their bank accounts? Can he restrict her communication, knowing she has a direct line to his accusers? But the bigger consequences are looming. And this is where the investigation moves into its next, more dangerous phase for Sumit. Based on the consular officer's report, the embassy has several options. If they believe Jenny is in immediate danger, They could work with Indian authorities to physically remove her from the home. But more likely, if the situation is one of coercive control rather than imminent physical violence, they will begin a more formal process. The first step is to officially declare Jenny a vulnerable citizen. This is a designation that unlocks a new level of consular support and scrutiny. It means the U.S. government formally recognizes her as being at high risk for exploitation. Her case is no longer just a file, it's an active, high-priority protective matter. Every interaction from this point forward is viewed through that lens. Once this designation is made, the scrutiny on Sumit intensifies exponentially. The State Department has vast resources for investigating marriage fraud and the exploitation of its citizens. This could involve a deeper dive into his finances. They could collaborate with U.S. federal agencies to track the flow of Jenny's Social Security payments. Did they go into a joint account? Does Sumit have access? Are there large, unexplained withdrawals? They could begin to build a formal case of financial exploitation. And then there is the ultimate leverage, his immigration status with the United States. Sumit has, in the past, expressed a desire to visit America with Jenny. This would require a U.S. visa. With an active investigation like this, that possibility is zero. In fact, the embassy would almost certainly place a permanent flag on his name in the system. He would be informally blacklisted. Any visa application he ever submits would be met with immediate denial. The note in his file would likely read something like, "Subject of a consular investigation regarding the exploitation of a U.S. citizen." It's a permanent stain, but it could get much, much worse. If the evidence supports a conclusion that the marriage was fraudulent from the beginning, entered into for the purpose of financial gain and securing a U.S. immigration benefit, even a future one, then he is not just looking at a visa denial. He could be facing formal charges. The U.S. can and does work with foreign governments to prosecute crimes against its citizens. While the legal hurdles are complex, the possibility exists. This is the catastrophic endgame Sumit now faces. The game is over. The reality show narrative has been supplanted by a federal case file. The man who expertly managed his parents, his wife, and the television cameras is now facing an adversary he cannot manipulate, charm, or deceive: the United States Department of State. The officials who visited his home were just the first wave. The quiet, bureaucratic machinery of an embassy investigation is now grinding away, and it is focused squarely on him. The potential consequences are no longer about family disapproval or bad edits on a TV show. They are about visa blacklisting, financial fraud investigations, and the very real threat of international legal action. His life as he knows it is teetering on the brink, and the next knock on the door might not be from a consular officer, but from Indian law enforcement acting on a request from the U.S. government. The final chapter isn't about whether his parents will finally accept Jenny. It's about whether Sumit Singh will face a global reckoning for a decade of alleged deception. Let's delve deeper into the fallout from that first seismic visit from the U.S. Embassy. The moments after the consular official's vehicle disappeared down the street were not filled with shouting matches or dramatic confrontations, as one might see on television. Instead, according to insider reports, a heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the apartment. This was a new kind of quiet, one laced with paranoia and the poison of suspicion. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant motorcycle horn was now a potential threat. Was that them coming back? Were they being watched? The power in the relationship which Sumit had held so completely for so long had not just been challenged, it had been fundamentally broken. He looked at Jenny, not as his wife, but as a potential witness for the prosecution. And Jenny looked at Sumit, perhaps for the first time, not as her savior in a foreign land, but as the man whose actions had brought the federal government to their doorstep. Sumit's immediate reaction, our sources say, was not anger, but a desperate, fumbling attempt to regain control of the narrative. He allegedly began a frantic line of questioning, trying to pry from Jenny every detail of her conversation with the officials. "What did they ask you? What did you tell them? Why didn't you call me? We are a team, Jenny. You should have had me in there with you." He tried to frame the embassy's intervention as an attack on them, on their marriage. He portrayed the officials as meddling bureaucrats who didn't understand their love, who were trying to tear them apart based on the lies of jealous online trolls. It was a classic manipulation tactic: create a common enemy to consolidate a wavering alliance. He needed her to believe that he was the victim, that they were in this together. But the spell was broken. Jenny now possessed something she hadn't had before: independent verification that her situation was not normal. The card in her purse was more than a piece of paper. It was a symbol of agency, It was a silent testament to the fact that an entity more powerful than Sumit's family, more powerful than Sumit himself, was on her side. While she may have defended him to the officials out of fear or ingrained loyalty, the seed of doubt had been planted in fertile ground. The years of financial instability, the isolation, the endless family drama, it all looked different now, viewed through the lens of a potential federal investigation. She became quieter, more withdrawn. The easy flow of their on-camera banter was replaced by a tense, watchful guardedness. The game had changed, and they both knew it. Sumit's attempts to portray the embassy as the villain were failing because for the first time, Jenny had a tangible alternative to her life of dependency. While this psychological drama played out in their small apartment, the bureaucratic war machine at the U.S. Embassy was just getting started. The report filed by the two visiting consular officers allegedly corroborated the most serious claims in the Slatten dossier. They noted Sumit's initial gatekeeping on the phone and at the door. They observed Jenny's subdued and potentially coached demeanor. They documented the financial precarity of her living situation. With this first-hand evidence, the case was reportedly escalated. Jenny Slatten was officially designated a vulnerable American citizen, and a multi-pronged investigation was launched, operating quietly in the background, spanning continents. The first front of this war was financial. The embassy's economic section, working with the Federal Benefits Unit that serves India, allegedly initiated a review of Jenny's Social Security benefits. Every month, a payment from the U.S. Treasury was wired to an account in India. The investigation sought to answer critical questions. Was this a joint account? Did Sumit have signatory power or an ATM card linked to it? They began to meticulously trace the flow of her only reliable income. But they didn't stop there. Through formal channels, they allegedly sent a request to the U.S. Department of Justice to liaise with TLC's parent company, Sharp Entertainment. The request was for financial records. How much was Jenny being paid per episode? Where was that money being deposited? Was it being paid to her directly or to a joint production entity controlled by Sumit? This move was a masterstroke. The investigation was now piercing the corporate veil of reality television. TLC, which had profited from broadcasting this unfolding drama, was now being drawn into it as a potential source of evidence. Their contracts, payment schedules, and production notes could become exhibits in a federal case. The network, which saw Jenny and Sumit as a lucrative storyline, was now facing a reality far more serious than ratings. They were in possession of evidence related to the potential financial exploitation of a U.S. citizen, and the government wanted to see it. The second front was testimonial. Consular officials in New Delhi couldn't just rely on what they saw in one visit. They needed to build a historical picture of Jenny's vulnerability and Sumit's control. To do this, they allegedly reached out to the one person who knew the situation better than anyone, Jenny's daughter, Christina. This contact was made with extreme care. An official from the State Department's Bureau of Consular Affairs in Washington, D.C., allegedly placed a call to Christina in the United States. The official reason for the call would have been bland and procedural, perhaps a routine follow-up concerning your mother's welfare abroad. But the questions would have been anything but routine. Can you tell us about your mother's financial situation before she moved to India? Was she ever financially dependent on anyone before she met Sumit? Have you ever had trouble contacting her directly? Has she ever expressed to you that she felt trapped or unable to leave? Can you confirm the amounts of money you and your wife have sent to your mother over the years? Each question was designed to corroborate a specific allegation in the dossier. Christina's on-air pleas and tearful confessions of worry were no longer just dramatic scenes for a TV show. They were now being transformed into a formal witness statement. For years, her concerns had been dismissed as family interference. Now they were being treated as credible evidence by the U.S. government. The embassy was building a timeline not just from the show, but from the testimony of those who knew Jenny before her life became a public spectacle. The third, and most sensitive front, involved liaison with the Indian government. The U.S. Embassy cannot operate as a police force in a host country. Any direct action requires the cooperation of local authorities. According to our diplomatic source, Richard, this process begins with quiet, informal conversations. An American consular official might have a scheduled lunch with a contact in India's Ministry of External Affairs. Over coffee, the American might mention, "We have a bit of a delicate consular case we're tracking. An American senior citizen, married to one of your nationals. There are some concerns about financial exploitation and undue influence. Just wanted to put it on your radar." This is a diplomatic code. What it really means is, We believe one of your citizens is preying on one of our citizens, and we are watching him very, very closely. This single conversation puts Sumit on the radar of his own government. It ensures that if the situation escalates, the Indian authorities are already briefed and are more likely to cooperate swiftly. It also creates another layer of pressure on Sumit. He is now a person of interest not only to a foreign embassy, but potentially to his own country's bureaucracy, a terrifying prospect for any Indian citizen. The perception of bringing shame or international trouble upon the nation is a powerful social and legal deterrent in India. Sumit's world was shrinking by the day. As the weeks turned into a month, the pressure on Sumit mounted. He allegedly tried to force a return to normalcy. He likely pushed for them to film their usual social media content to project an image of a happy, untroubled couple. But the camera doesn't lie. Viewers who were paying close attention might have noticed a subtle shift. A strain in Jenny's smile, a frantic, desperate energy in Sumit's eyes. The easy chemistry was gone, replaced by the tense performance of two people acting out a script, acutely aware they were being watched by an audience far more powerful than their fans. His paranoia would have grown. Every official-looking car, every unknown phone number was a source of anxiety. He would have likely doubled down on his attempts to isolate Jenny, trying to monitor her phone calls and read her messages, desperate to ensure she wasn't communicating with the embassy. But this only made him look more guilty. He was caught in a classic abuser's paradox. The more he tried to tighten his grip, the more he confirmed the very accusations of control that had started the investigation in the first place. For Jenny, this period was an excruciating emotional tightrope walk. The trauma bond that had kept her tied to Sumit for a decade was at war with her survival instinct. Every lie she had accepted, every red flag she had ignored, was now being re-examined. The man she loved, the man for whom she had sacrificed everything, was now the subject of a federal inquiry for harming her. How do you reconcile those two realities? The cognitive dissonance must have been overwhelming. One moment she would feel a surge of loyalty, remembering the good times and wanting to protect him. The next, a cold wave of fear would wash over her as she recalled the consular officer's words. "We are here to help." The business card in her wallet felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, a constant heavy reminder of the choice that lay before her. The tipping point, our sources claim, came not from another unannounced visit, but from a calculated strategic move by the embassy. They had gathered the financial data. They had Christina's corroborating testimony. They had their own officer's assessment. They now believed they had a comprehensive case establishing a long-term pattern of exploitation. The goal was no longer just to investigate. It was to facilitate a resolution, and the only acceptable resolution was ensuring the safety and autonomy of the American citizen. The embassy allegedly made contact with Jenny again, this time using a method they were confident Sumit could not intercept. They didn't call the house phone. They may have used a third-party intermediary or a pre-arranged communication channel. The message was simple. "We would like to invite you to the U.S. Embassy for a follow-up conversation regarding your case. Transportation will be provided. We must insist you come alone." This was the checkmate move. The U.S. Embassy is sovereign U.S. territory. Once she stepped inside its walls, she would be beyond Sumit's reach, both physically and psychologically. On that neutral ground, surrounded by American officials, flags, and seals, she would be able to speak freely, without fear of immediate reprisal. For Sumit, this was his worst nightmare realized. He could not stop her from going. Forbidding an American citizen from visiting their own embassy is tantamount to kidnapping. He had no choice but to watch her get into the waiting diplomatic car, knowing that the woman who returned, if she returned at all, would be a different person. Inside the embassy's secure consular section, the final pieces were put into place. Jenny was not interrogated. She was, for the first time, empowered. She was allegedly met by the same female consular officer who had visited her home, a familiar and reassuring face. They sat in a private office, and the officer laid out the situation in calm, unequivocal terms. They explained that based on their investigation, the United States government considered her to be a victim of long-term financial exploitation and coercive control. They walked her through the evidence they had gathered, the dissipation of her life savings, the pattern of her isolation, the history of deception she had endured. They validated her experience not as a series of bad choices, but as a textbook case of abuse. Then they presented her with her options. Option A, she could choose to return to the house and the embassy would continue to monitor her case from a distance, with regular check-ins. Option B, they could, right now, begin the process of repatriating her to the United States. They explained that they had the authority to issue her an emergency passport if needed. They could arrange and pay for a flight to her daughter's city through a repatriation loan program. They could connect her with social services back in the US designed to help victims of domestic abuse and elder exploitation. They made it clear, if you want to go home, Jenny, we can have you on a plane within 48 hours. You can walk out of this embassy and straight to the airport. You never have to go back to that house again. To reinforce the gravity of the choice, they allegedly facilitated a secure video call with her daughter, Christina. For Christina, seeing her mother's face, knowing she was safe inside the embassy, was a moment of profound relief. For Jenny, hearing her daughter's voice, unmediated by Sumit, was a powerful callback to the life she had left behind. The love and concern from her family, so often twisted and used as a point of conflict by Sumit, was now presented as an unconditional offer of sanctuary. As Jenny sat with this life-altering choice, the embassy made its final move against Sumit. While Jenny was safe inside the compound, two different officials were dispatched to their home. This time, they were not there to ask questions. They were there to deliver a notice. They served Sumit with a formal letter from the U.S. Department of State. The letter, our sources allege, officially informed him that he had been found inadmissible to the United States under Section 212A of the Immigration and Nationality Act. The specific subsections cited were likely those related to fraud and willful misrepresentation of a material fact to procure a visa or other immigration benefit. The letter would have stated, in cold legal language, that due to his actions involving a U.S. citizen, any and all future applications for a visa to the United States would be permanently denied. There would be no appeal. This was the catastrophic consequence made real. It was not a threat, it was a verdict. His dream, whether real or feigned, of ever traveling to America with Jenny was dead. He had been officially branded an exploiter of an American citizen by the U.S. government, a permanent black mark on his record that would follow him for the rest of his life. The document he held in his hands was the tangible result of his decade of deceit. He had played a long game for control and financial security, and in the end, he had lost everything. The U.S. government had called his bluff and removed his queen from the board. The final scene of this real-life drama was not filmed by any camera crew. It was Jenny, walking out of the U.S. Embassy, her decision made. The weight of years of emotional and financial burden seemed to have lifted. She was on her way not back to the man who had systematically dismantled her life, but to an airport, to a flight, to a future she could once again call her own. The story of Jenny and Sumit, which had captivated millions as a reality show romance, had reached its conclusion as a successful consular intervention. It was a rescue mission, executed with the quiet, formidable efficiency of international diplomacy. The game is over. The U.S. government has stepped in, the allegations of exploitation were taken seriously, investigated thoroughly, and acted upon decisively. Sumit Singh is now facing the permanent consequences of his alleged actions, blacklisted by a global superpower. Jenny Slatten, declared a vulnerable citizen, was offered a path back to safety and dignity. This was the final chapter, a story not of a failed romance, but of a successful extraction from a situation that many believed was a tragedy in the making. If you believe it's time for this kind of official intervention to be recognized and for victims of exploitation to be protected, no matter where they are in the world, then share this video. Let this story be a testament to the fact that sometimes the most powerful reality is the one that happens when the cameras are turned off.